What would your intro song be?
I'll give it with a Turnpike Troubadours. We'll start
Nice.
there.
Okay.
Little Texas Red Dirt.
Yep.
Let's see, maybe 7 by 7.
Well, I had no clue I'd be the boy who your mama warned you about.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
a good one.
I'm Billy Mitchell,
And I'm Megan Metzger.
and this is CTRL+ALT+DEFENSE.
All right, well, welcome in, folks. We're really excited for this episode because I think it's one of the first times we really have a sort of meeting of the minds between ourselves, as content creators, podcasters here for Controlled Defense, and a fellow content creator in Preston Stewart. His following's way bigger than ours, so you probably know more about him already. But if you don't, Preston has been doing a number of podcasts for several years. I'll ask him to kind of dive into those in a second, but really following the national security content creation space, and has a background in the U.S. Army, most recently as a U.S. Army Reserve Field Artillery Officer. Preston, welcome to Control-Alt-Defense, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the invitation.
I know I didn't do you justice there. So before we get started and before we dive into some of the fun stuff, tell us a little bit about the different projects you've worked on in the content creation space, the different podcasts or YouTube channels, if you will, that you've overseen over the years and where you're kind of at today. I think the newest one is it Unfiltered?
I do one with a friend of mine, Ben Wheeler, called Unclassified. And it's
Unclassified, sorry.
just
Like,
once a week kind of
unfiltered, we
get
can
together.
just do it.
Yeah.
That's good.
Ben follows a lot of domestic policy things, a lot more than I do. So it's a good way to kind of tie that in together. When I'm looking at more war and conflict, and Ben's looking at procedural things in the House. So that one we do once a week. But everything it's been all over the place, man. It's feeling as we go. This wasn't an intended career, so it's just been testing things out that I enjoyed. And sometimes there's been some podcasts. We did some military history focused podcasts. When the war in Ukraine kicked off, there was just a huge audience trying to figure out what it meant. Like, what is a fighter versus a bomber? What is air defense? I've never heard that term before.
Okay.
So there was an opening to kind of explain that in just more layman's terms. And I think it's kind of coincided with the rise of independent media or more access on social media, people getting their news on other platforms. So I've just kind of ridden that wave, I think is the best way to put it, doing what I enjoy, trying to stick with what I find interesting each day. But today it's primarily YouTube. So, 15 to 25 minute video on YouTube each day, just kind of what's happening. And of course, as we're recording this, there's a lot happening in the Middle East.
A lot happening.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of guests. Steve Blink came on, the CTO of Palantir, and they're huge defense history buffs. And it's really, a fascinating area if you start when they, are talking about, things that happened in our history as a country, and then what you start to see repeating or not repeating in a lot of ways now. It's a fun topic to nerd out on. So maybe another day we'll do a little history lesson.
Yeah. I know you think about the aircraft carrier argument, like it wasn't going to be or the battleships maybe is a better example in World War II. That was going to be the thing, and then it wasn't. And then, each one of these conflicts, looking back and seeing what the thing was and how everybody was wrong about something, I think about that a lot. Is what is it right now?
Yeah, what's the current happening that in the future they're going to go, man, remember when they wanted faster horses and not tanks?
Exactly.
There with our, UASs, and who knows? Time will tell. We are a little ways out from the closing of the Olympics, or the Winter Olympics. I don't know if you're a fan, but if you could do one Olympic sport, talent wasn't an issue from the Winter Olympics, what sport would you do?
Hockey. I grew up playing hockey, and that's just so much fun to watch. Holy cow. I was watching those games in the middle of the day. They were on at like 7 a.m. That was great. Sit here at work and have a little hockey on in the corner. I watched some NHL, but it was so cool, especially the U.S.-Canada team. Like, that was like an all-star game where the people were actually trying. So it was just wild to see that talent on display. So 100% be hockey.
So you like war, conflict, and translate that into sports as well, where you just
Works well there, yeah.
got it. All right, Billy, over to you.
Yeah, and Preston, I know I mentioned this in sort of our talk before we jumped on camera, but I've my family is from a similar area. Actually, I have an aunt who lives in Murfreesboro, so same area as you, outside of
Yeah.
Nashville. And I always love to kind of stir up the debate about Nashville because everyone I hear talk about it either loves it or hate what it has sort of morphed into. So, as someone who has been around that area long enough, based on your time in service and now sort of being based there. In your new career, what's your take on Nashville? Are you old Nashville, new Nashville? Do you think it's changed a lot? Do you love it? Do you hate it?
Ah, man, we're boring. We don't go to Nashville a lot. It's nice to have that available. We're probably 30 minutes away, so Murfreesboro is
Yeah.
not far. We like that we have an airport that close, and the Nashville airport,
Yeah.
like it can get as big as it wants. I think that's great.
Yeah.
We're going direct to London now. We have once a day, direct Nashville to London. We're big time here. So we like that. There's options to go downtown. We just don't do it a lot. So I'm okay with it now. I'm a fence sitter on Nashville.
I think you mean
I
it
like that.
Nash. I think it's Nash Vegas. That's what it's called.
Yeah,
now.
Nash Vegas.
That's the part that we don't see a lot of. We spend a lot of nights at home, not a lot on Broadway these days.
Yeah. So no interactions with the little trolleys that the bachelorettes get, where they're pedal trolleys, pedal taverns, whatever they call them.
It looks like a lot of fun. It's worth it.
Yeah, well, it looks painful.
Yeah.
Too
So
old.
let's get into it, and let's start with your most recent endeavor as a content creator. Obviously, we can get into your past in the military and things like that, because so much of that obviously informs what you do today. But you've been creating content now, whether it's YouTube videos or other avenues like TikTok and things like that, for quite some time. Tell me about how that journey's evolved and what you sort of envision that audience to be. You mentioned, just a moment ago that you never really anticipated that this was the direction you'd go in. So, but now you amass, more than 1 million followers and, tons of visits and things like that. So tell me about that journey and kind of where you see yourself today, like you said, in a non-mainstream sort of media role, because you are a part of that story now, whether, other traditional media organizations like it or not. You're part of telling those stories of what's going on in conflict abroad. And it would be interesting to hear how you've sort of recount that journey from, getting started and what you're doing to the point to what you're doing today, and who you sort of see as that listener or viewer at the other end of what you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if I approached it the right way. There's a lot of folks that'll say you got to envision the audience first and figure out what what the ideal viewer is or consumer is. And I never really thought about that, for better or for worse. So, but I mean, I can, based off of the analytics, it's 25 to 45-year-old men in the United States, like almost exclusively. But I think that actually kind of speaks to this bigger picture, which is more people are transitioning to getting their news and getting their information elsewhere. So when, this was a hobby is the best way to put it. And I just thought it was interesting to share at the time in terms of current events, an airstrike in Syria. It was just after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the platforms didn't like, that was hard to talk about because you'd say Taliban and they would say, can't use that word. That's a terrorist organization. But people started right about the time that I was doing this is when people were moving to get more of their news on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. So I thought it was crazy when 10,000 people would see an event, but I think it's just kind of opened the door to, like, there are a lot of people interested in this. They just didn't have a place to go to get it previously. I know for a long time I remember talking to my Army friends of saying, like, what podcasts do you have around national security and foreign affairs? And there were like 2 or 3. It was, 7, 8 years ago. It'd be like a couple from, I think, War on the Rocks maybe had a couple.
Yeah.
But there was nothing. So I think there was a big audience out there, and now it's just that the content is kind of catching up with that.
I'm curious, from a content perspective, I know you cover a lot of war and conflict, and, what a time for that topic to be front and center. But it feels like we live in a world where there's so much information, yet I still don't know what's going on. And I'm wondering, of the type of content you're putting out on your platform, like, what gap do you think you're solving for? Or why do you think there's such a a need or a desire to learn what it is you're talking about. What are the
It's
traditional
interesting.
platforms not doing?
I don't think they can get as detailed because I remember a year or more ago with my family in Texas, my parents over Christmas, and they said something like, "Why isn't the Wall Street Journal covering this or the New York Times?" I said, "Well, they're at 10,000 feet. They're covering so much around the world. The audience that's coming to my channel is wanting to find out the details on Ukrainian offensive operations in Zaporizhia yesterday.
Yeah.
Wall Street Journal can't. Wall Street Journal could do that. It would be a waste, and most people would say, I don't know what most of these words are.
90% of the country go, what? Yeah.
Exactly. So I think it's just more and more niche. You know, there's the war in Ukraine, I think, is a great example. There's so many people that they wake up wanting updates on that. And if you're trying to get a long article or a 30-minute podcast or a 20-minute video, that is not on traditional news, especially if you're in the United States. It's just, I mean, you open the New York Times, I'd be shocked or Wall Street Journal, anything. I'd be surprised if there's anything about Ukraine on the front page, let alone the first few pages. So I think there's just, again, there's an untapped audience out there that the traditional media is not going to apply to. And I don't think they can.
Do you think that some of the traditional media, obviously it's going to be hard, like you said, to dive in that deep, but wars are also fought very differently with the way technology has evolved. A lot of it, there's not as much flashbang because some of it is in the background is cyber warfare. So it's not quite as clickbaity in some ways for a national publication to cover the stuff that's really interesting around the drone attacks because you just don't see it as much. I don't know if you agree or disagree. I would love to hear your take on it.
I think it's a mixed bag because we're definitely seeing more footage right now.
Yeah.
I mean, definitely out of Ukraine. That's kind of a world of its own.
Yeah.
It's nonstop every day. But even in Iran right now, I mean, we're getting a fair amount of official strike footage being released from the United States and Israel. So
Yeah.
I think the outlets have to compete with that because there's your 10-second update, right? We hit these targets and here they are going boom. So they have to compete with that on the short form piece and try to get an audience that's maybe interested in more of a deep dive. So I think that could be challenging.
Sure.
What was that journey like? I imagine nothing seems to be a straight line to success. And I'm curious and maybe I'm wrong, but if not, what was the point at which things started to click a lot for you in terms of, people tuning in and really engaging with your content? Was it the start of the war in Ukraine, or was it another point? Was it a change in the technology in terms of how you could do this stuff and get to people in a massive way in a quicker amount of time? When did you really feel like what you were doing started to click with your audience?
The war in Ukraine was a big change in terms of the type of content I was making, but there hasn't been like a thing. And I always wait for the thing to happen, whether it's a number of subscribers or a certain video or a trip or an interview. And I'm pretty confident at this point that there's not going to be a thing. But the war shifted the content from mostly military history to mostly current events. And I haven't looked at it. It's something that I've always been interested in. My degree in college was international relations and terrorism. I just didn't, we were talking about this. This wasn't, I don't know. I never thought about being a reporter or this was probably like a State Department or, certain federal agencies to do this type of stuff, focused on it, not report on it. But I think when the war kicked off, it just brought so many people in to want to know about this stuff, again, on TikTok. All right. So it's a platform that a few years prior was just kids singing and dancing. Now adults are opening that up to find out what happened in Kyiv overnight. So I think that timing was kind of the big change.
And, I saw that you recently went to Ukraine. I'm not sure if you had been there previously and had, content around that previously, but it was a really interesting production that you had. And obviously you've been covering that engagement between Russia and Ukraine for quite a while. So you have tons of knowledge covering it. But I'm curious, being there on the ground, what you were able to kind of parse that maybe you hadn't seen previously and your big takeaways, whether it's something tactical or technological that you think, you are able to get and share with your audience through this unique vantage that you have, again, outside of the traditional media establishment that others might not be getting, that the folks that in the traditional media or even other observers in the defense kind of apparatus are maybe underestimating?
Yeah, the trip was awesome. And I don't know if this maybe makes me a bad reporter or bad content creator, but I did not go with the plan of making a lot of content. It was mostly just going to meet the people that we've been interacting with for years and getting to spend time with them and hug them and shake their hands and have dinner with them. So there wasn't a lot that came out of it directly for the audience. I learned a ton that has really influenced a lot of things since, but really just got a couple quick videos. And then a part of that was the Ukrainians they're crazy. Like, come on over to our battalion command, our brigade command post and look at the drone feeds on the wall.
Wow.
Like, who am I? We're going into drone manufacturing facilities with, you got to leave your phones in different locations and turn them off and all, like, and I just get to go in. So
Yeah,
a lot of
that's
that we
amazing.
couldn't record. Yeah. But the big takeaways were, for me, getting out east, realizing how difficult a situation that is. There's some like 2-lane dirt roads keeping those guys supplied out there. And it's been that way
Yeah.
for a while. And driving those roads was, oh my God. It's not just a matter of getting a truck in or out, but you've got to get supplies in. You've got to get casualties out. And there's no other way. So being on that road, seeing the trucks come and go, realizing like this is one of two ways in and out of, the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk pocket, that's tough. That's going to be very hard to hold. Another big one was just how far ahead they are with drones. I'm following it every day.
Yeah.
We know that they're leading the way, but getting into some of these workshops, we went to a battalion level research and development facility. So this is a group of, call it 100 soldiers. Their battalions are a little bit smaller than ours. It was 200 maybe. And they have R&D, where these guys with 3D printers and they're soldering chips over in the corner, soldiers, not contractors, not civilian employees, soldiers that got, this was a volunteer unit, so it wouldn't have been conscripts, but 18, 25, 35-year-olds researching and developing new types of drones that go into the fight the next day. Like, it was wild.
It's interesting because that is an area that, there's so much energy and momentum around right now. And in this administration, we have to move closer and closer to real-time battlefield, transforming in contact. And yet I think I've mentioned on some other episodes, I had an opportunity to tour around CENTCOM, AOR, and go to some of the bases that are now under attack. And I will never forget that we were in Kuwait, and I went into one facility where they analyzed all the one-way UASs coming in to determine what we need to do to counter them in the future. And every single one-way UAS was different because they're tinkering and they're switching and they're tailoring things on the spot. And then I walked 2 hangars over to a different service who had 3D printers, and it sounds a lot like what you described. And those 2 organizations didn't ever talk to each other, but one was solving the problem that the other was identifying. They were just in different services, 2 doors down on the same base. And it, we hear it and we learn about these things, but it's so different when you actually see it and witness it to understand the complexity of the problem and the simplicity of the problem all at the same time. So I think that's do you think that we're learning quick enough from the stuff that you actually saw and witnessed? I know there's a lot of folks in the department focused on what can we learn from Ukraine. Do you think the lessons that you saw and what you experienced are making their way back into our services at the right pace?
I hope so, but we also run the risk of learning the wrong lessons. So we're seeing a lot of focus on that. So look, one-way strike drones, FPVs, it's sexy. You get that drone footage and you got a soldier out there launching this thing and destroys a tank. I got it. I don't know that should probably be a top priority for the United States. We probably need to be more concerned about how inexpensive those are, that our adversaries could have a lot of them. It's things like that where a lot of the solutions coming out of Ukraine are very specific to that battlefield. And if we try to do that exact thing it might not solve a problem that we have. How many circumstances do we have where we're within 30 kilometers of an enemy and we need a wire-guided munition to bypass their electronic warfare and take out a tank? Pretty limited. It's just not a major issue that we have right now, or even would necessarily foresee with China or Russia. But I think that gets a lot of the attention. And then seeing the Russian and now Iranian long-range strike drones.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's, I know we've used some supposedly against Iran in this recent wave of strikes from Lucas, I believe. I think the lesson we need to be taken away from this is so much on the defense side. It's very hard. And even at this point, Ukraine and Russia don't have it figured out. They're getting there, but I think that's something we should be paying more attention to.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting. One quick point. You mentioned cost, and another thing that stuck with me from that trip was how many of the incoming UASs and different weapons from the adversaries in the region were ordered parts off Amazon, and duct taping them together because the integrity of the materials around the thing that can actually cause harm didn't matter anymore. You're like, man, when we spend a fortune to build these things that they're just duct taping together off Amazon.
And there's a middle ground, right? I think that's where we struggle with this is from what I've seen with U.S. drone manufacturers, they're expensive. So they're putting together $20,000, $40,000, $50,000 drones with a shorter range and a smaller payload than the ones Ukraine is producing. So I was like, well, that's an awful comparison. Like it won't work. But Ukraine also, they can't build the best possible. They have to build the best that they can right now because it needs to be used tomorrow.
Yeah.
Kind of solving different problems in a way.
Yeah, and that's super interesting, Preston. I'm curious, just based on that trip and other experience and your subject matter expertise in this space and what's kind of developed over the last several years, what are some of those other technologies? We've obviously talked about drones, and those are no doubt going to be the leading thing going forward. But are there other things you've seen on the ground in a technology standpoint that has really made a difference? And then compare and contrast that to your own experience of what you've seen here domestically in the way we're training for these things and experimenting and working towards that. Are there other developments that you think will make a big difference that there might currently be a gap between the state of the art and what we're working towards?
Starlink, I think, is a good example. How, it really wasn't being used at the beginning of the war. It was all pretty traditional military modes of communication. Guys were still using cell phones, kind of what you'd expect when a war randomly kicks off and a lot of civilians are pulled in. Motorola, kind of two-way walkie-talkies. It has gotten to the point where if Starlink shut off today, the Ukrainian military would be in a bad way. Like, I don't want to say collapse. That's probably a bit of a stretch, but it would be at that level risk. And when it shut off for Russia a few weeks ago, I mean, Ukraine took advantage, took back territory, carried out a significant amount of strikes, and Russia was stumbling. So that very lightweight, very inexpensive, very easy to set up and maintain connectivity forward, I don't know what that looks like in the United States. My understanding is we have some different platforms we might be utilizing, but the reason that one stood out to me is it allowed soldiers forward access to send information very quickly and securely. It was very hard to target because of how it sits on the ground. I mean, we've seen Russia, after Starlink was shut off, they're climbing towers trying to set up Wi-Fi links, and they're getting hit with drones because you can see that clearly.
Yeah.
And the commercial aspect, I think, was probably the most nerve-wracking because it's great. It's an important service. But Starlink literally on one day said, Russia can't use this anymore. And great. I think that's a good thing. It terrifies me that could happen with anything we have or what that headache would be.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. You're thinking about it in the reverse. And I know a lot of energy goes into looking at the technologies that are going to help shrink and minimize our footprint. So we're not, our soldiers and warfighters aren't walking around like a Las Vegas casino saying, I'm over here. But I think there's probably, just like you said before, a middle ground of how do we tap into more of those commercial capabilities like that so that we can spin up, connectivity really fast, but then not end up in a situation where Starlink decides, okay, America, Starlink, obviously different story, is the one I'm going to turn off. We're not up the creek without a paddle. what is that middle ground? Like, where does commercial technology and the government actually come together to create a solution that brings you kind of closer to center? And I think that's a lot of activity going on around that. But again, back to our speed and kind of making sure things are actually making their way into the battle space, it's going to require different risk calculation.
Yeah, and one of the benefits, again, to the wrong lessons to take away from Ukraine is when you look at some of these drone feeds, they're open. Like
Yep.
I know the U.S. military is not going to do that. Like, we're not going to put an
Yeah.
FPV drone in the battlefield that the enemy can watch.
Yep. Yep.
But Ukraine and Russia both do that. The kind of the least expensive, most volume they have for drones. You go into some of these command posts, they are watching enemy drone feeds. It's just a thing that they do. They've got little handheld devices now that they ride around in the cars, a little bigger, like an old Game Boy, about that size.
Okay.
And it automatically intercepts the nearby drone feed. So you'll be riding in your car and you can watch this thing. And when you see your car on the feed, it's like, veer
Oh,
off, jump out. So,
wow. Holy moly. That's terrifying.
so
I don't think I would want to be in that situation.
but it's a different problem set than a different set of requirements when it's essentially acceptable. I mean, I'm sure if they could just push a button and that was encrypted and not intercepted, they would do that. But for the cost, that's an acceptable trade-off. That's something that I know the US wouldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess you could see the argument, like things are moving so fast by the time you hack into it, figure out where it is, can you keep up even, but again, that's back to that risk calculation. Like, what risk are we willing to trade? And I've talked a lot about that when it comes to pushing software updates over the network, and how do you push software to battleships in under 24 hours, for example. And you see a lot of that legacy mindset around how we're going to test it and make sure it's secure and look for vulnerabilities and all the ATOs. Like, yeah, but if you actually get your process and your cadence down to where you're pushing updates so fast that by the time the vulnerabilities are discovered, you've already pushed a new version of the software, is that like, are we calculating the right risk here? So it sounds like there's lessons both of what to do and what not to necessarily take away from Ukraine that we can continue to study, but fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a unique spot with all of this, right?
Sorry, I'm gonna
We're kind of rolling the dice now, and I think we have been arguably since World War II, rolling the dice of when needed, we will be able to meet the threat with manufacturing, with production, with deployment to the force. Ukraine is testing it right now. So
Yeah.
it's not theoretical for them. So it's just different, because if they don't get those drones to the battlefield, that front might start to collapse. So they just, I don't want to say, there's something about being in a war that forces your hand in that development. And we see that throughout history, right? The craziest jumps in innovation happen in wartime. And that's Ukraine right now. Even though we're watching it, we don't have the same urgency behind it at all. And another random one here in that sense is Ukraine is able to tap into the brain power of some of their best and brightest that without the war would be going to start a company, or would be going to work at Amazon or Google or financial services or something. They're now working with the government or with some of these leading edge drone manufacturing companies. Instead of making AI for a search engine, they're making AI to identify Russian tanks. So they're tapping into a segment of their population that probably wouldn't be available if there wasn't a war.
Super interesting. Preston, you just mentioned AI, and I think it's on the tops of a lot of folks' mind. It was, but more recently with everything we've heard about the feud between the Pentagon and Anthropic, which was just a handful of days ago. But I would love to hear, your perspective on how AI is actually being adopted. Obviously, there's a lot of pontificating and thoughts here domestically, and there's a vision from the companies themselves and the leadership in the Pentagon, but what does it actually look like on the ground there? And, if you're willing to go in this direction, how big of a deal is it for something like Anthropic to be pulled out of that tech stack for those operators who might rely on it? And kind of going to the Starlink analogy, now they don't have that. It's not the same as maybe being deployed and having that and then the next day not. Obviously, Anthropic's still going to be around for a couple months as they look to kind of take it off of the this sort of tech stack. But what is that going to mean to have one less tool in their tool belt? And how would a AI like that be used actually on the front lines?
So that's a great point. Here we are saying, well, good news, Starlink is American, so it wouldn't happen. But there's an example like in the last 48 hours of something like this happening. So I don't know how the Pentagon and how DoD is using any AI right now, how they're using Anthropic. So I can't speak to that very well. In Ukraine, we're seeing it used for targeting, again, identifying the type of weapon system. Is that a tank or is it a truck? And then automating a lock-on. So as the electronic warfare jammers kick in and sever that signal at 50 or 100 feet, they're using AI to lock onto that target and continue the strike even after the connection has been severed. One way that I don't know if Ukraine's doing this now, but it would be something we would need to use, is the volume of imagery coming out of this conflict is insane, and it's too much.
Mm-hmm.
So every one of these, thousands of missions being flown every day, and those are just the strike missions. Those aren't even the recon ones. So it is too much. And you have to think that what I see at the company level flying the drone, you might see at the battalion level is really important. So we got to make sure that somehow you see what I don't even think, and you can't sift through it all. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So
Agreed.
I think some AI tools to help sift through that rapidly and identify certain areas and themes and weapon storage locations, maybe changes in the battlefield, because manually it's overwhelming. But think of the value of how much overhead imagery they have on a real-time basis. Every one of those strike drones that goes to hit a target, it's not just the last video of, look, that's where the soldier was, but the entire 17-kilometer flight. They're seeing stuff. And that is a shocking amount of data that I have to think is being overlooked right now. AI, it's got to be a way for AI to or to leverage AI in that regard.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. There's these gaps, whether it's the sort of influx of imagery and, you're realizing what's going on and seeing it play out there. And as you said earlier, it may not apply directly to the next big conflict that the U.S. is anticipating. But are there other gaps like that or opportunities, maybe putting it another way, for, additional areas on top of the imaging that, we have a lot of folks who we talk to in the defense tech innovation space and the venture capital space, and really that like convergence of how, innovation from Silicon Valley or elsewhere is really starting to be injected into the Pentagon. But if you were going to talk to some of those defense tech founders or the venture capitalists who are interested, who may be responsible for the next great idea that helps us win the next conflict, what would sort of be your advice on those opportunities? Obviously, you just mentioned imagery being too prevalent, the volume of it being too big, but are there other things that you might sway them to that aren't apparently obvious, or maybe they might think Ukraine and Russia applies, but it doesn't necessarily? Are there ways you would steer them towards certain things that would make sense for us to invest in?
I've got a boring one, but I think
like
it's going to be
boring.
overlooked because it's boring. All
Always
right.
my favorite.
Yeah. Something as simple as near drone defense. So we saw a ship today in the Strait of Hormuz get hit with an unmanned surface vessel, big hole in the side. It's going to be a problem for a while.
Yeah.
We're seeing just the threat that these very low-cost drones have on everything. And for a ship, something to be able to have, you remember the RPG cage? Well, you've seen them in Ukraine now, little cages added to the vehicles, and it just pushes it out a little bit. Depending on the ship, we might need that through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That might be necessary in the Strait of Hormuz to just provide a little bit of standoff. It's not perfect. It's not this fancy counter drone technology, but it's just an inexpensive added layer of protection to what is becoming an increasing threat around the world. And the same thing for airfields, putting nets overhead.
Yep.
Something little like that.
It reminds me
That's
of
interesting.
I have a dear friend that has told stories about early days in Afghanistan and Iraq. Well, while we were waiting for the technology to prevent IEDs, they were strapping hair dryers to poles in front of the tank just to set it off 10 feet before. It's like that it didn't have to be expensive. It just needed to work and it needed to be fast. And it sounds kind of like what you're talking about, like, stop with the fancy tech sometimes, just throw a net over it and call it,
Yeah. I mean, that net will save $1 million aircraft or $10 million aircraft. They cost a lot. I don't know how much those cost now, but yeah, little nets over airfields or
Yeah.
command posts. We had a conversation with a Army general a few months ago, and he made the change for their field exercise that everybody had to have some degree of netting over their position to protect from drone drop munitions. So just a little change. Said without that, a small grenade goes through and blows up the command post, but a little net over the top, little fishing net or something. So I don't know. It's not super fancy, but there's a big market for that. Maybe is the way to put it.
Well, the last thing I was saying, then we can pick to some different topics, but it makes me think. I talk a lot about the fielding and all of our testing and the requirements for safety releases and things that the military has to go through before you can actually push capabilities out to the warfighters. And one of the things that we've been advocating for pretty hard with our down in the programs is, what is the risk of inaction here? Because if the risk of not getting them something is way higher than the risk of what might happen if that thing's not tested to perfection, you've made the wrong choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So get them the technology or even the nets so that they can actually defend against it, instead of waiting till the launcher hits 99.99% effectiveness, or safety effectiveness, if that makes sense. So it sounds like you've seen it and kind of lived some of that firsthand on where and how you make those trades. But sometimes I wonder if we're making the wrong risk trade-off.
I think one of the big lessons we need to be taking from this is, again, it's not fancy of like this type of frequency for this type of strike drone, but just being flexible and adaptable, because traditionally we're not. The military. I mean, it's a joke of how long it takes. It's a running joke of how long it takes to get a new aircraft out and running, or a new aircraft carrier, or even how about the Army coming up with a new rifle, right? Like 20 years in the making, and maybe we'll get there or something. We just can't. We have to be more flexible than that. It was maybe a year ago, I think it was 173rd maybe released a video saying, look what we did. And they dropped a grenade from a drone, and they got trolled on the internet because people were saying, nobody's doing that anymore. You're 2 years behind. What happened? So we just need to be more flexible. We can't try to keep up to date and on top of everything. We should not have all of the technology perfectly in sync with stopping Russian drones today. That'd be a waste of our money. But we got to be flexible enough to make that shift when we figure it out.
Yeah. So Billy, do you mind if I want to jump back to Preston, the content maker.
Yeah, do it.
You have so much knowledge about what's going on down and in Ukraine. I could spend hours on it. But I'm curious of all the types of things that you've covered. You've gone to Ukraine. Like, what's been the biggest surprise for you as a content maker? Whether it's something you learned about how the military is operating, or just something about what types of information resonates with people. Like, what's been the biggest surprise?
Oh man, I don't know about biggest surprise. I got a couple that stand out. First off, the information sharing, I think, has been really interesting. Ukraine has probably led the way in you got soldiers putting out statements, giving you a really clear view of what's happening on the battlefield. And it seems to be working for them. It doesn't seem to have cost at this point operational security. It's in terms of like fundraising and supporting units, I think it's been a net win. But that is so counter to what we think of.
Yeah.
Of like, don't you dare do any of this stuff. And there were mistakes early on for sure, but that's been interesting. I mean, you can talk to a soldier at one of the forward positions in Ukraine right now, and someone will do a FaceTime with you to just chat. And
wow,
that's eye-opening, because we're seeing the other side where the U.S. is still completely locked down with all of that. Another one that's been interesting is there's a window of like 24 to 72 hours where people are just interested in the information before they figure out what, for lack of a better term, what side they're supposed to be on. So like Pakistan and India, when that kicked off, there were about 2 or 3 days of people just taking in the information. All right, what's happening? And then a switch flipped, and it turned into everything is propaganda or bad guy. Like, just like overnight, people got enough. So that's always interesting. I laugh about that. Like 1, 2, 3 days in, it's pretty good, and then it gets pretty nasty.
Fascinating. I'm dying to ask how you think that will translate into the current happenings, but
It's the other like unintentional part of this is part of information warfare, whether you want to be a part of it or not. It
yeah.
is. And like there are state actors involved with trying to shape perception. And I don't really know what to do with that information.
Yeah.
But it's a thing, you know?
Well, do you feel like you have indirectly a role in that because of the number of viewers that you have and your ability to share information in a certain way? Like, how do you see yourself as part of that picture, whether intentionally or unintentionally?
Yeah, a little bit overwhelming, to be honest, to think about it that way. It's whenever I meet folks in
Country
person.
Preston, no big deal. Yeah.
Yeah. Like the numbers on the screen don't really register. And then you meet people in person, and you're like, wow, this is crazy. There's somebody again, you run into somebody in Ukraine that watches the videos or something. And I think about it a lot and just try to do my best with being honest and genuine. Yeah, it's tough. We think about the weight of that in a lot of ways, you know?
Yeah, I'm curious, you mentioned the people that this has put you in front of or you've met. I'm curious if you've found out anything interesting or met somebody interesting, or it's, an opportunity has arisen because of this that, because at the end of the day, you are an influencer, you have people's attention, a big group of people's attention, and you're informing them in a certain way. So obviously that's something that if I'm a senior military leader, I care about what you know and how you're, sharing that information. So all that to say, have you been connected with anyone interesting, or has anybody asked you to do anything like in terms of support? Any interesting opportunities or people that have come through this, operation that you do?
Yeah, I think content is kind of becoming the new networking in a way, because the three of us would not have networked in person in all likelihood anytime soon, but content kind of brings that about. So yes, like I've been fortunate to go to some events with NATO at the NATO headquarters around the world, a couple different events they've had that I only on their radar because of this. And then linking up with military. We did some interviews with IDF officials last year during the 12-day war. Same thing. So now a bunch of contacts in the IDF and in Israel and in Ukraine. It's ever growing. It is just, it's like a networking tool. Yeah, it feels, I don't know, it feels like a good side of LinkedIn, maybe. If you put out good information, every so often you get some good,
Who is the most fascinating person you've had the pleasure of meeting through that network?
Most fascinating person. That's tough.
Besides Billy and I, obviously.
Of course. Yeah, of course. There's a couple. So Ryan Hendrickson is a former U.S. Army Special Forces soldier that stepped on an IED in Afghanistan and then went to Ukraine and started demining operations there. So he runs a demining nonprofit called Tip of the Spear Landmine Removal. That's got to be up there because he's just insane.
Yeah, I was be pretty fearless, I guess, is the simplest way to put it.
Wild. And he was over there right away too. He was one of the ones where when the war started, he went, if I remember correctly, and was like evacuating civilians as the Russians were coming in. So that was crazy. I would say we just had a short meeting, but the commander, one of the core commanders in Ukraine, again, because of this. So Denis Prokopenko is call sign Redis. He's the commander of the 1st Azov Corps in Ukraine. Okay. And we got to meet with him in a small group when I was over there. So went to their headquarters, got to meet with their leadership, and I think he's like 34, Corps commander, and he's one of the guys that was captured in Azovstal, held in Russian captivity, and then released through Turkey.
Oh my goodness.
So,
I
being
can't
able to
imagine.
meet that guy was pretty, again, just because I make some videos on the internet. So that was pretty cool.
Wow. I mean, the stories and just the resilience of these people you've had an opportunity to meet, you know, it makes you do a
Humbling.
little self-reflection too,
Oh,
right?
seriously.
I had one last one, because, not a loaded question at all, but, you're in front of two other folks trying to get a podcast up and going. What advice would you give to people in the base content creation and how you reach your audience and how you've gotten so successful at the end of the day? Like when you're doing what you do, what's going through your head about whether something, what's your barometer of whether something's going to be successful or not when you're making a video? How do you know, or do you just put it out there and hope for the best?
Much more put it out there and hope for the best. I don't think I'm very good at a lot of this. So like the editing and the scripting and, so it takes a lot of practice. So I put out a lot of videos because nobody watches the first few or dozens or hundreds. Like realistically, nobody sees them. So you get a lot of practice, and then each day, each video, you get a little bit better. Each podcast, you'll get a little bit better. You figure something out that you just can't do by just thinking about it. And people have a pretty high threshold they don't care, right? Like if you make a product that isn't good, people just won't consume it. That's fine. Like, and then you learn and then you do it a little bit better the next day. So it's not a big loss to make something that needs to be improved upon. So for me personally, it was doing a lot. Like YouTube videos every day and TikTok and Instagram every day just for practice. The other thing I would say is it has to be something that you're very interested in, that you enjoy, because you probably need to do a lot of it. I had a good friend of mine that's very successful on YouTube. His big advice was release videos on Friday afternoon.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think that was. I don't know that was what brought him success. I think there were some other things that tied in there. So there's a bunch of little things like that of make sure you have just the right camera or just the right audio or have the hook down. But I think it all comes down to just doing it a lot, practicing a lot. And then the cool thing about this line of work is the audience will tell you. So you don't have to guess. Like you put something out and nobody watches it, or you get 6 mean comments, like, all right, maybe try something different, for better or for worse. There's instantaneous feedback.
Do you have an episode that just, went crazy compared to other ones? And can you pinpoint what it was about it?
I can't. That's the problem. I have an idea. So when stuff kicked off in Mexico a few weeks ago, I had a pretty good idea that anything about that was going to do well.
Yeah.
Outside of that, it gets tricky. I think the best performing one I had this year was the massacre in Sudan, of all things, and it was very short. It just pulled in. I don't know if maybe there wasn't a lot out there about that at the time.
Yeah.
It wasn't like and it was just kind of based off of what Reuters and AP and CNN were talking about. So it wasn't some crazy like behind the scenes, but I think that was like the best performing video. Like 3 million people watched it or something.
Wow.
It must have just been, I don't know. It caught YouTube at just the right time, but other times I'll try to do those kind of one-off and people are just like, we're not here for that.
Yeah, you try to recreate that magic, and I don't know.
Yeah. No.
It was a Thursday instead of a Friday, Preston. That's what did it.
Right, at 11 a.m. instead of 2 p.m. release, and it's done. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I used to there was a period of time where if you sent event invitations on Sunday nights when people were like prepping for the week, you actually got the most responses. And that's kind of human psychology, like really fascinates me. But
I feel like there's something there, but I don't know. YouTube is big on telling you it doesn't matter. And I feel like they're just saying that it has to matter to some degree.
Well, this was fascinating. I really appreciate your time. I have so many more questions, and obviously really impressed with the platform that you have and just the insight and the knowledge. It's invaluable, but you're also just a wonderful person to talk to. So thank you.
Thank you, Megan, Billy. Awesome to be here. Really appreciate the invite.
2 quick last things. One, share whatever anybody listening should know about how to engage with your content, your different platforms, and where to find you. So let's start there. I'll give you the opportunity to do that.
The best is probably YouTube. It's the longest content there. Everything else ends up being kind of segments off of that, but it's just my name, Preston Stewart, on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and X.
Okay. And of course, we'll share it in our show notes. And then our last is a question we ask everyone. It's a fun one. We start fun, we end fun. It's a music question. Hopefully you're a music guy. You know, if you're going to go speak on stage, or maybe since you're creating videos, you had an intro song before you start. But what if you had that song that's going to get you pumped up and ready to go into the spotlight to speak or do whatever, go out on the ice for hockey, what would your intro song be?
I'll give it with a Turnpike Troubadours. We'll start
Nice.
there.
Okay.
A little Texas Red Dirt.
Yep.
Let's see, maybe 7 by 7. They got a couple, but Turnpike Troubadours, kind of like that beat.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
a good one. All right.
Put it on the list. Put it on the Spotify
Here we go.
list.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Preston. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for joining us. And best of luck. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Great chatting with you guys.
All right. Take care. Over and out.